It's great to follow Cheryl and Rick primarily because I think you'll find that we're kind of stepping down in levels of granularity as we work our way through this. I think Cheryl did a phenomenal job of, that is not my first slide in case you're wondering, AV people. But I think Cheryl did a great job of talking about the foundation of what it takes to run a successful enterprise, tremendous results. And Rick did a great job of characterizing what's happening out in the marketplace around big data and where it's going. I mean, most of us here are from North America. There's a few folks who are from other parts of the world. But foundationally, the North American marketplace is probably one of the most competitive and loyalty, rich markets in the world. There's tons of cards that are out there. I'm sure if once somebody discovers that you're part of the loyalty industry, there's any number of conversations at cocktail parties that go on where you're inundated with questions about loyalty programs in one form or another. But just think about the loyalty programs that you operate or that you belong to. At some level, each of these programs represents an exchange that's based on trust, right? At some point, you have signed up for something, or the consumer has signed up for something with this view that they trust the company, you would think, at some level, enough to share their own personal information and sign up for these programs. And when they're operated properly, and I think Rick would agree with this as well, is that people actually do like loyalty programs. I mean, we don't work in a despised industry. People get a lot of value out of them. People see a lot of relevant offers from certain programs that come through. So there must be that there's some basic level of trust that exists between ourselves and our customers as we launch these programs. Now, I think the second thing you'd all agree on at some level is that some level of trust is required and is essential to successful, long-term, sustained commerce, right? But when it comes to talking about privacy as a topic, the problem you have is when we look out in the marketplace, some companies out there, some organizations are acting as if there's not really a reason to care about privacy in the eyes of the consumer. And in fact, what we see is that we're starting to see an erosion of the relationship between companies and customers that exists out there, an erosion of trust. And so what's going on? What's driving this? If you think that you enter into this relationship because of trust, and the next thing you know is that there's this erosion that's happening in the marketplace, what's driving that? Why would we even go at this as companies? And the problem that we have foundationally is that it's important for companies to constantly remind themselves that they are actually not at the center of the purpose of commerce. We may be there to drive profits and build earnings per share, but at the end of the day, the real reason you're there as an organization is really to revolve to serve the customer in some capacity. Now, the first step in that is really to understand, especially if you're in the loyalty business and you're using customer information, is to manage that data responsibly and then to use it appropriately, as Rick had outlined through his presentation. And when it works, it creates this wonderful virtuous cycle, right, which may be different than a virtuous cycle a presenter tomorrow is going to talk about. But in my world, virtuous cycle starts with essentially some form of relationship with a customer which causes them to give you permission to share some information, which then over time builds an element of trust. And that trust in turn builds the relationship being deeper, and over time you get more information being traded through. But this cycle actually appears to be broken. In our second annual study on privacy, did one in 2011, again in 2012, what I can tell you is that consumer trust out in the marketplace appears to be fading. And the call to action here is that I think if organizations don't begin to act quickly against what we see in this erosion, is that gradually what will happen is that we won't demonstrate that we have the consumer's best interest at heart. And what will happen is that we'll see a continued erosion of that, and ultimately an erosion of the potential profitability that will come about from a really meaningful information or customer information exchange with the customer. Now, when we went out, and there's a white paper which is available out at our booth, and I think we'll distribute tomorrow morning as well, what did our data show when we actually went out and asked consumers? And we started by basically asking them a simple question, which was, do you trust companies with personal information? And when we asked customers that, only 42% of consumers across this study, across Canada and the US, said that they actually would respond positively, agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that consumers trust companies with personal information. And overall, what we see across everything that we measured, there was an increasing level of skepticism about the perceived benefits of sharing information, and a declining willingness, in fact, on behalf of the consumer to share it, even when it was shared in return for a promise of better service or relevant offers. Quite surprising, actually. Now, this is the second year we've done the survey, as I mentioned, and in fact, the numbers generally are getting worse. And to put this in context as we go through, let's just give you 3 quick examples, is that, it's not as if consumers are unaware of the fact that they're being tracked or monitored. The vast majority of consumers out there are well aware when they sign up for a program, they give a phone number, they give an email address, and in fact, or go online, they're being tracked. And so, just to give you a few samples of this, we asked people, do you feel that companies are using personal information to provide better service to you? In 2011, that number was already low at 52%. 2012, it had slid to 48%, just less than half, feeling that, hey, you know what, they're using my information to give me better service. When we asked them, do you think when you give your personal information that you're, in exchange for that, you're getting more relevant products and service offers that are being produced for you? And again, the number was 67% last year who agreed with that, and it had declined to 63% this last year. And the last one is when we said, do you think that you're not receiving a benefit for sharing personal information? What's amazing is that number went from 74%, so 3 out of 4 consumers, to 78%, a little over that. So 3 out of 4 consumers essentially think, I'm sharing personal information through all these programs, and then through Colloquy we know that the average consumer in the US belongs to 18 different programs, actively participates in probably 8 to 10. And three out of 4 of them essentially say, I don't think I'm getting any incremental value by virtue of participating in this. Now, let's put some flesh, no pun intended with the pregnant lady here, on those numerical bones. Let's talk about how it's actually manifesting itself in the marketplace. How many of you have read Charles Duhigg's book, Power of Habit? 2, thank you, Bill. How many of you have saw the New York Times article on the weekend about and have heard at one conference or another about the Target case example? Anyone? More hands, okay. So let me put this for the people who haven't heard about this. So the story, which Target refutes and says it's not really true, is that basically Target sent a mailing to a teenager who was that had been identified through their deep algorithms and analysis that had said this person is likely pregnant, likely to be having a baby at some point in the future. We want to start building a relationship with this customer about this impending event. Now, we all know through that advanced analytics and anything that gets to these sort of major life stages like a pregnancy, a new move into, you're moving in a new house, you bought your first apartment, you're retiring. These are major significant life stage points where all bets are off. There's a bunch of things that are going to change in the way you spend money and where you spend that money. And so clearly it was very natural for someone like Target to do these kinds of analytics to figure out if somebody's pregnant or not. And in fact, the good thing about that is if you get it right, you get an opportunity to insert yourself into that conversation at an appropriate time, unless you send the package, a mail, to somebody whose father opens it when you're a teenager. And that would make for an interesting conversation at the dinner table, right? Anyway, the story goes on around the father going up and down Target's back in terms of the fact that they shouldn't have sent this mailing through until finally the teen, in theory in the story, admitted that, yeah, I'm pregnant. So we would look at that as marketers, as data-driven marketers, and we'd say, wow, that is a brilliant use of algorithms, right? Wow, if you could actually go through this and say, thank you for nodding and being actually truthful. Yeah, we would say that. We'd look at it and go, that's really cool. I wonder how they did it. And in fact, back in my office, when we went through this, my CMO at LoyaltyOne was the CMO of Shoppers Drug Mart, which is the largest retail pharmacy chain in Canada. And he said, and we were talking about the perils of this, and he turned to me, he said, 14. I said, 14 what? He said, 14 months. I said, Neil, you're not making any sense. What the hell is 14 months? He said 14 months, between the point where somebody stops buying contraceptives to the point that they start buying baby-related products. That's the average period of time. So it's not that companies aren't doing this. And it's not that it isn't clever to the quantitative folks around the table here, but we've got to pull ourselves back and look at it through the lens of the customer. And for the customer, this is a highly technical term, creepy. Right? It plain and simply is creepy. Like, how can they do this? How do they draw these conclusions? What data are they using? But this retailer, as I said, is not alone. When we delved into the research a bit further, what it really pointed out is one very simple point. Consumers don't like the idea of being tracked. They just don't like it, right? You think about your own experience. Whether that's physically or online, they don't like the idea of being tracked, despite that this is a widespread practice in our industry overall. Now, so we took this a little bit further when we did the study. And one of the great pushes in recent years is, right, location-based services. It's all about how do you get location-specific data about consumers. And why is that important to us? Well, because as marketers, if we know where consumers are physically, and we know when they're in that location specifically, then that opens up this incredible wealth of opportunities for us to market to the consumer. I'm sure Cheryl would love to know when people are in the vicinity of a Popeyes restaurant, especially if they're a great customer and you have a fabulous restaurant offer or a new product that's come out. You want to communicate that to the customer. It's very natural. Now, here's what's interesting. When we ask consumers about the types of information that they would share, consumers told us that they would rather share personal and mental health information. They would rather share political affiliation. They'd rather share sexual orientation in advance of where they are, where their cell phone is, the mobile tracking. Okay? In fact, where you are, the location-based services side of things, was on par at 15% with actually sharing the number of sexual partners that you've had. All right? That's not a ringing endorsement, by the way, folks. The only thing lower than that in the survey and all the data that we requested was a social security number. All right? So what do we have here? What is the situation we're going? Well, if you dig a little bit deeper and you actually look at some of the commentary that you get back, is I think you've got a difference between a push versus pull kind of environment. And the way, as Rick says, you know, in the Minority Report clip, the way that companies actually use this information. So how many of you, you're in Vegas, use something like Zagat or a restaurant recommendation engine or New York, or you travel somewhere and you say, hey, I'm looking up restaurants that are around me. How many of you have done that? Hands up. Okay, that's 2/3 of the room. How many of you have been lost somewhere and punched in your cell phone, right? I need to get from here to here, and it asks if you can share the location. How many of you have done that? Okay, again, most of the hands in the room. So the difference that we're talking about here is that consumers are very comfortable with pull. When I want to pull the services and share my location on my choice, on my terms, I'm happy to do that. But a point that you're actually scraping this information from me and then sending me unsolicited offers, I'm not so happy about that as a consumer. Now, this may well be like online payments a number of years ago. Do you remember when, if you actually deemed at a cocktail party to say that you had bought something online and actually punched in your credit card number, right? And people would go, you're crazy, are you nuts? Your credit card's gonna be stolen. You remember those days? Yes, right? So this may well be like where online payments was, call it 7-10 years ago, right? None of us would think twice, for the most part, about typing in our credit card into a shopping site today in order to purchase something. It's part of what we do. And I think if the industry does the right thing, eventually location-based services may be the same way. We may be very happy to cede an element of control back to the marketplace and allow companies that really honestly, genuinely create value out of that information for us to use that on an as-needed basis. Because, you know, as one of my clients once said, the use of location-based services, that data is just too logical to ignore, right? It's just too logical to leave that on its side, too important. It's the right way to go, but we need to work to understand how to bring consumers along the way as we build these things over time. Now, companies today, as Rick did a great job of doing this, so I don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but they have access to staggering amounts of data, right? They really do, whether they're using it or not. I quite often get called from various reporters who ask about big data, and I say, big data, screw big data, let's talk about small data. Okay, let's talk about the fact that the data that you can actually use as an organization to create value. Because too many organizations aren't using the information they have today to create value and really build that virtuous cycle with the consumer. But we have the ability, technologically, to amass vast amounts of data. And we have the amazing computing power and the analytical tools today that didn't exist 15 years ago. I started in the industry over 20 years ago. And I can tell you that 20 years ago, look at some of the old-time veterans in this room that I've known for about that length of time, we know that 20 years ago, we could think of all sorts of amazing things which were possible, and we had no hope in hell of getting them to be executed. But today, it's all possible. In my book, I actually call this the capability revolution, the marriage of the ability to deal with all this information, analyze it, and then through the digitized channels that exist today to deliver a unique experience to each customer. Walmart, a couple of years ago, collected something like 1 million transactions every hour. And I'm sure that number's grown over that time place. A database in the petabytes, they probably account for a big swath of that piece of data that was in the previous presentation. But data collection without a clear purpose, without a clear understanding of what you're going to do with it, it's actually more than annoying. It's actually potentially dangerous to business. Now, how many of you would feel like this guy? Not because, that's what I felt like at about 3 o'clock in the morning when I was trying to get back to sleep because I was on Eastern time. Where you're working with companies that ask you for information. They literally ask for your preferences in something. And they set up an expectation with you that you are going to get something in return for sharing that incremental amount of data. And then they ignore it. And most of the time they ignore it because they ask for it and they don't know what they're going to do with it. And if they do know what they're going to do with it, all of a sudden they discover that that information and the way they use it doesn't fit a predefined set of expectations which allows them to run their business profitably. And so you end up disappointing the customer. My favorite example of that is the hotel industry, right? How many of you are members of hotel programs? Don't be shy, right? You probably have a dozen. Okay? You can join here. They've got one special for this hotel if you're really a points junkie. And what do they do half the time when you join, right? What would you like? Oh, I'd like a floor away from the elevator on a high floor. And yeah, I'd like the nice hypoallergenic puffy pillow because that's what I'd really like. And then what happens? You show up in convention season. They put you on a low floor, slightly above the bar, right? Or next to the elevator where everybody's coming in and out drunk. And you're sleeping on a pillow so hard that your neck hurts in the morning when you get up, right? That's basically what you're looking at. So the moral of the story really about this is that when you do ask for data, it comes with an element of accountability. And that companies that are going to set expectations with the consumers that they're going to do something with it and then actually fail to deliver against the information that they collect are really failing to put the data to work responsibly. So I'm going to get all of you. This is the audience participation part of the game, okay? So we're going to play with some ideas. And what I want to do here is recognize that I think at a purely gut level, we all think about this idea of what is creepy. And you can realize as an organization and as individuals, actually, you realize that your behavior both online and offline is, as I said, being tracked. So we sat down and we said, as part of the study, we wanted to understand where that line was between clever and creepy, right? I mean, what we consider to be clever, what we consider to be intelligent, algorithmic-based marketing may not exactly be the same way that the consumer looks at that same activity. And so we asked this 2,000 consumers that we surveyed a series of scenario questions to have them determine whether we had the line right, whether we understood what that was. And I want all of you to do that. So we're going to play the clever versus creepy game. I don't have some fancy music which will come up with that. But okay, everybody game? All right, good. This will wake you up before you go out for coffee and the speed networking. So I'm going to read you a statement. And then what I want you to do in a second is vote whether you think it's clever. So a person with diabetes joins a pharmacy health program. Adam Holick, you should pay attention to this. Providing the pharmacy with their previous health history as they go through it. The pharmacy then ends up sending the consumer offers on products that are recommended for people with diabetes. In other words, recommended could be anything. Could be everything from the little things you prick your finger with to read your blood glucose all the way through to different food products, okay? All right, so how many of you think the consumer would say, you know what, I like this. It would be clever. And how many of you would think this is creepy? I don't think it'd be cool. Thank you for being honest back there as well. So 98% of the room on the clever camp as they go through it. In fact, yeah, consumers said this was clever. 76% said, I'm okay with this. I'm just fine if they were to do that. Okay, the next scenario, I've only got 3. A person is browsing for a particular product online. We all know this. A few days later, they're on a totally unrelated website. Oh, up pops that product again, right? This retargeting. And you start seeing ads for the product that you were browsing for earlier. How many would think, hey, you know what? The consumer's going to go, wow, that's pretty cool. I think that's clever. Hands up. Come on, be honest. Okay, about 20%. And the rest of you would be creepy. How many of you just don't care? Because you're going to do it anyways. There you go. That's good. Thank you. Thank you for your candidness in that one too. So in fact, yeah, the consumer, you guys are right again, the consumer said, on balance, I'm not okay with this. I really don't think this is something I'm comfortable with. 68% said creepy. Last one for you. A person uses an online website for grocery delivery, and they allow the website to store past transactions over time, and then the website then uses that information to make recipe recommendations based on what they bought in the past. Okay? Consumer going to be okay with that? How many of you think they're okay with that? How many of you think, nah, I don't think the consumer's going to like that very much? Invasion of privacy, whatever. 95.5, you guys are good. You must be professionals. 72% said, you know what, I'm okay with this. What you see here is there's not an overwhelming direction one way or another in terms of, but there clearly is an indication from the consumers that they're comfortable or not comfortable about this. So what we learn from the situations as you go through it. I think, as I said before, tracking can at times feel quite creepy to the consumer, but it seems that the real core element in this is around uncertainty. Right? As Rick said, when the customer doesn't understand what's being collected, what's being tracked, and how it's being used, that's what sets up the creepy filters in their mind. That's what drives the creep quotient, if you want. And so, again, back to the idea of oceans of data that you can analyze and the ability to be micro-targeted in your activity coming off of that, we all need to recognize as we're engaged in this that there are pitfalls, that none of us want to set off a huge privacy firestorm, and certainly we don't want to erode the trust that we've built so carefully with customers over time. So how do you efficiently use all this information? How do you connect with customers in a way that captures their attention in this fragmented attention economy that exists out there? How do you capture that information in a way which is cost effective, that your CFO doesn't basically jump all down your head when you're spending all this money to do it, and that you're providing a return on investment and in a way that respects the consumer's trust? We have to take what I call the loyalty leap, right? And it is foundationally about finding a way to share the information that you have about the customer in the organization and to broadly release the power of that information beyond the marketing department, to make it so that all the enterprise, all parts of the organization are participating in a conversation. Like Cheryl said earlier around customer experience information, right? You need to share that more broadly through the company so that everybody can begin to act on that information. Data can inform decisions across the company on how to improve the overall experience. But the key here is foundationally that when you get back and you look at the data, what you find is that companies that are taking this approach are surpassing the kind of traditional loyalty marketing programs or one-off programs that you see, one-off campaign programs that you see in the marketplace. They're generating better results. Now, what are they doing differently? This holistic approach at its base is changing the way the whole organization responds to customers, right? And the goal here is to drive customer intimacy. The goal is to connect with the customer in your own unique way. Because while there'll only be one Walmart in any category that competes on price, there may only be one Apple in any category that competes on product leadership, the fact is that every company can compete on the basis of customer intimacy. This is not just about marketing communications. It's not just about the offers you put out there. It's about thinking about how you transform the customer experience at every point along the value chain. And it's not easy these days to achieve trust as the number of channels and the amount of data that we have on consumers continues to multiply. So let me give you one quick example of how we do this for some of our clients. Sobeys is one of our partners in Canada. They're a $20 billion grocery retailer in that country. We operate with them with the Air Miles Reward program, which is a coalition-based program in Canada. We have access to all the item level data that people are purchasing through Sobeys. And we can work with them to analyze the information and essentially find the happy medium between what is most profitable for the merchants in the company, the categories of products that they want to sell, at the same time as we're looking at the individual shopping behavior of the consumer to determine what would be the thing that would generate the greatest amount of interest from the consumer. Out of every time we do this, we end up usually with an algorithm which spits out somewhere between 100 and 300 offers that would be great for the customer. And we have to boil that down into the subset that would be the best offers that would go out. So we have an algorithm that optimizes which offers you put in each one. Out of every million pieces that go out, and this happens online and through paper mail, out of every million units that go out, 987,000 of them are completely unique. And not unique because we changed the store manager and the address and the person's name. Unique because the basket of offers that's there, whether they get $1 off or whether they get bonus currency, all those are completely customized. So beyond response rates, which are tremendously successful, let me tell you what's really important about this. The customers, even though it's clear that we're tracking everything they're doing, love these mailings. Okay? They talk to the cashiers about the mailing. They ask to speak to the store manager because they perceive the store manager sent them the mailing. They want to talk to the store manager and thank them for sending the mailing. And they talk to their friends, which we know is increasingly vital in today's digital economy. And interestingly, even when they call our customer care center, which has nothing, frankly, to do with Sobeys, they talk to our customer reps about how much they loved the mailing. When's the last time your marketing actually did that? All right. The previous example is work we do as part of the Air Miles Reward program at LoyaltyOne. It's also done using Pressimo, which is Brian Ross will be speaking tomorrow and leading the analytics track. We have 20 years of history of running very highly complex campaigns on behalf of our clients. And out of the 10 million households that participate in the program, that's 70% of Canada, and the billions of interactions that we've actually had with consumers over the years, every year the consumers have an opportunity to opt out of receiving targeted communications. And to date, on a cumulative basis, 0.01% have done that. So I can tell you, not only do they like loyalty marketing, but customized targeted communications can work, and they don't have to cross the creepy line. We've also advised as a company and worked with companies that launch loyalty programs that affect hundreds of millions of people on a global basis. And from this work, what we've derived, and I'll leave you with this, 5 basic rules of good data usage that help to protect and preserve this relationship between consumers, the data they share, and ourselves as companies. So let me run these through you very quickly. The first, and Rick had it in his slide as well, is be transparent and reasonable. All right? Transparency is critical to this. The more transparency you can have, the greater the engagement that you will have from consumers. My advice is always very simple. It's a little like the national parks when you go in and they say, leave everything there that you took. Something, I don't know. I'll get that right someday. But this is my advice for you. Collect only the data that you need and use the data you collect to create value for the consumer. If you start with that as a basis and foundation of what you're doing, you reduce the likelihood of getting yourself in trouble. When you're transparent, when you enter into a promise with the customer, basically keep it. The second piece is rely on the provision of choice. In Canada, we go all the way to permission basis because that's what our privacy legislation requires. But allow for the provision of choice. The best way to build a value-based, trust-based relationship with the customer is to give your customers the opportunity to choose what they share with you and to choose to enter into the relationship. That's why I think loyalty programs are so magical if you structure them the right way, because it enters into a structured way to exchange information. And that kind of opt-in really does elevate the relationship. It starts right off at a higher level, and that exchange with better data can yield stronger relationships over time and ultimately more profit. The third thing, and I won't spend much time on this at all, respect and protect the data. Treat the data as a significant corporate asset. Customer trust carries with it a large weight and responsibility. And you've got to just look in the mirror if you're running a loyalty program or the customer information in your company and ask yourself one question. If you had to stand in a courtroom against the judge and jury of the consumer and be able to say you did everything you could to protect the information you had about them from the hackers and people who want to breach the databases that are out there? Could you stand up in the court of public opinion and do that with a clear consciousness? If you could do that with a clear conscience, then I think you're in the right space. The fourth thing is, don't wear out consumer trust. And on this side, it's really simple. How many of you think you get too many emails every day? How many of you are still getting spammed like crazy? I cleared my mail. I don't know what I signed up for anywhere, but I'm back on the junk email trail from somewhere. Every morning now, eight emails, completely random. Not related to my web traffic. I got to figure it out. Anyway, so let me ask you this question. One, there's 3 questions. You want to make sure you're not adding to the burden that the consumer is feeling out there as a whole. One, ask yourself, are my emails too frequent? Right? Really. Sit down and say, am I sending too much stuff out? 2, ask yourself this question. If I really step back and look at them, am I really using the information I have on that consumer to create a relevant communication to them? Are they relevant? And 3, do they genuinely offer some sort of real value to the consumer? And if you can't answer positively to those 3 questions, go back and revisit what you're doing in your communication strategy generally. If your marketing annoys customers, right, if it's just annoying, they'll tune you out even if they don't opt out. And the last thing is embed and restart the virtuous trust cycle. Like think about, imagine yourself as the first company that really fully optimizes the use of customer information to create this value exchange and what would be possible through the use of that information, and then drive towards that. Building trust is like building face-to-face relationships. You share a little, you get something back, you share a little more, right? It's no different than how you would build a friendship. Customers are comfortable with this, and they will embrace it. And as long as the customer information is being used to enhance the customer experience, you have the opportunity to build a long-term, sustainable relationship with the customer. Just don't screw it up. So, as I said, the white paper will be available. Leave you with these thoughts. Customers want relevant experiences today. They're not waiting for them 5 years from now. They want to start receiving them today. And increasingly, what will happen is if you don't deliver it and another company or competitor does, they're going to move to the company that delivers that relevant experience. It will be table stakes in terms of how competition will happen. If you get it right, you have the opportunity to not just create transactional loyalty, you have a chance to create emotional loyalty and true engagement with customers over time. What you need to do is really find a way to know our customers better, to find a way to respect their privacy and make sure that we're using that information to create deeper value sets between ourselves. In the end, we have to earn the right to grab and hold a customer's attention. It's just the fact of what's happening in the marketplace today. And that attention is where growth is going to come from over time, and everything else is, anyway, from a loyalty marketing's perspective, just noise. Thank you very much.